All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Don Sauce here. I'm the Faculty Associate Director of the Teaching and Learning Center, and you found your way to our TLC Professional Development Series. We meet every Wednesday at noon in real time. We also archive these events, a circuit history for viewing later on our website. So if you have a colleague who really needs to see what's going down today, please point them to that, and you can see an archive of all the events that we've had already. If you come to enough of these events, you can potentially earn a professional development certificate, either as a GTA or as a faculty or staff member. My colleagues have just dropped that into the chat. You can also become a TLC fellow if you're a faculty member, which is super cool. And then you get to present in the series next year. So that is awesome. We've got actually a couple fellows who are joining us right now. We're going to begin, though, before I say anything further, with a land acknowledgement.
All right, let me go ahead and share my screen and sound. Don, can you see what I want you to see? Perfect. Okay, here we go.
As the first land-grant institution established under the 1862 Morrill Act, we acknowledge that the state of Kansas is, historically, home to many native nations, including the Kaw, Osage, and Pawnee, among others. Furthermore, Kansas is the current home to 4 federally recognized native nations: the Prairie Band Potawatomi, the Kickapoo Tribe of Kansas, the Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska, and the Sac and Fox Nation Missouri in Kansas and Nebraska.
Many native nations utilize the western plains of Kansas as their hunting grounds, and others, such as the Delaware, were moved through this region during Indian removal efforts to make way for white settlers. It's important to acknowledge this, since the land that serves as the foundation of this institution was, and still is, stolen land.
We remember these truths because K-State's status as a land-grant institution is a story that exists within ongoing settler colonialism and rests on the dispossession of indigenous peoples and nations from their lands. These truths are often invisible to many. The recognition that K-State's history begins and continues through indigenous contexts is essential.
Please remember
these truths
because we still remember.
Thank you. Before I introduce today's presenters, I was going to tell you what's coming up next. Next week, we're going to have a teaching chat. We're very excited about those. We have opportunities for y'all to bring any topics that you'd like to discuss and crowdsource some kind of answers to, concerns, whatever. I'll have a topic that I want to bring there too. I'll let you know what that is later. 2 weeks from now, Melissa Glasser is going to be talking about supporting student workers. And this is something that, for whatever reason, we've kind of missed in our series so far, but we're really glad to have that opportunity. Many of us do oversee students in lots of capacities as teaching assistants and so on. So we're really excited to have Melissa in a couple weeks from now talking about that. But today, we actually have a wonderful group of people. We actually talked about doing something like this, I believe, in the spring of 2020, right before the world kind of went differently. We kind of talked about this, and now we finally got our act together and we put this together. I'm so excited. We're going to have our colleagues talk about engagement and service learning at K-State. We've got Mirna Bonilla, Tim Steffensmeier, Tamara Bauer, and Trish Gott. Thank you all for being here, and the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. And Tim, do you mind sharing the slides? Great, thank you. Well, as Don mentioned, thank you everyone, first and foremost, for being here during your lunch hour to have a conversation with us and explore how more into how engagement and service learning fits into our work. Engaged learning is core to the university, and as we become the next Gen Land Grant University, we really want to focus and have a conversation about what opportunities there are with engaged work, but also how applied learning is a tool that can help us make progress in these efforts. And so before I get started, thank you, Don, for introducing us. My name is Mirna Bonilla. I am the program manager here at the Office of Engagement. We are located in the Staley School. So I also want to allow the rest of our colleagues presenting some time to introduce themselves, but we do invite you also to put your name and your department in the chat to kind of help us orient ourselves to everyone that is represented here today. So feel free to add that in the chat, and then Tim and Tamara will also take a look. But Tamara, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, and we'll get started?
Yeah, thanks, Mirna. Hi, everyone. It's great to see so many familiar and awesome faces across campus. My name is Tamara Bauer. I teach classes in the Staley School of Leadership and also oversee some of our leadership and co-curricular service programs within the school, and look forward to engaging in learning and conversation with you all today.
And I'm Tim Steffensmeier. I'm Assistant Vice President of Engagement and Outreach here at Kansas State University. I came to this fine institution in 2005 as a faculty member in Arts and Sciences. So my space was Communication Studies. And Mirna noted that we're in the Leadership Studies building, and they are kind enough to house us. Our reach with the Office of Engagement is to support all of the academic departments in our campuses. So Olathe, Salina, and then our colleges and schools, including the Staley School. So really glad to be here and hope we can make a little bit of sense together. I'm going to start with the largest frame or the broadest frame, and then we'll narrow down a little bit and locate, I hope, what all of you do or aspire to do in terms of how you might be using engagement as a way to teach and construct your classroom environments. And then we'll also have an opportunity to talk about how that fits with this applied learning and service learning. My guess is all of us know that we have launched a strategic plan called K-State Next Gen Plan. If you're not familiar with that for some reason, there's all kinds of materials on the web to do that. One of the themes of that, I think a really exciting theme, is that it's doubling down on our land grant mission and purpose. And theme 5 says, integrate engagement across all we do. And I know there's a bunch of words on this slide, and you're not supposed to put this many words on a slide, especially if you're a good teacher, but I'm doing it for rhetorical effect. Our faculty senate and the subcommittee in the faculty senate did a bunch of work last year under the guidance of Tanya Gonzalez and LaBarbara Wigfall and others. And they were successful in getting some changes made to the university handbook, which is kind of dry, kind of boring. However, it's really important because it sets the stage for putting a spotlight on engaged teaching and learning and ultimately being rewarded for that work. So the first step is to think about, well, what responsibilities do we have as faculty members here? And what this university handbook change does is it adds a paragraph. So if you can't see all the words, that's okay. The stuff that's underlined was the additions. And that first paragraph that was added to our faculty responsibilities as faculty in section C1, 2, and 3 really doubles down and says, here's what the land grant mission is. It's about advancing the well-being of Kansas. It's about advancing the well-being of all people in this area. And you might think of that through the lens of economic prosperity or health and well-being. And it's really tied to the work we do in terms of the discovery of knowledge, the education of students, and the improvement of quality of life. And we do that how? Through our scholarly activity. So that's kind of that first big paragraph in the handbook saying, nothing radical, nothing new, just writing it down and saying, here's our commitments. The other small changes, although they, again, set up, I think, a reason or a rationale for departments and units and colleges to start embedding examples of what this looks like in teaching and learning in your promotion and tenure and your annual review documents. It talks about teaching efforts, and it explicitly talks about external stakeholders. So we'll talk a bit more about that, how that might show up in a classroom through applied learning or through engagement broadly. And then in the research area, we added words like publicly engaged research. So just a few minor changes that were made to the handbook, but I actually think they signal a pretty big shift. That's not to say that lots of faculty haven't been doing engaged kind of teaching, creating partnerships, working in community, doing what Tamara is going to talk about, applied learning. But this is to say that we can double down on that and recognize that, and hopefully have a lot of ways for folks like you and all the colleagues that are coming after us to get rewarded and recognized for the good work they do, including how one is promoted or how one is reviewed each year. So thank you to our faculty senate and those that were responsible for this. And again, that's connected to theme 5, integrate engagement across all I do. That was one piece, one tactic. There's a lot of other ways that we're going to try to make this happen. But I want to move on and stay real focused on why we're here today. Tamara?
Yeah, so as part of the work that Tim kind of framed for us, we also see a really clear directive in each student having an applied learning experience before they graduate. And this is really focused on, again, preparing our learners and preparing our students for what life looks like after graduation and how to be engaged citizens and really fulfill that mission of the land-grant institution. Again, I think that this, to me, just highlights or pulls out something that's really been important and embedded in a lot of areas of K-State and in teaching and in faculty, but it highlights it in a way that I think will make it more measurable, more specific, and then hopefully we can continue to engage in conversations like this where we can continue to provide professional development and support to one another as we think about how we create and how we support these applied learning experiences with students moving forward. In a future slide, we'll talk a little bit about when we say applied learning, what does that mean? What are the kinds of categories and spaces that we're thinking about? And then we'll talk a little bit more specifically about service learning as an applied learning experience too.
So as Tamara mentioned, we have the measurable metrics for the applied learning, but also I think a part of it when the launch of the next strategic plan, part of it was also of how do we start, where are we at? And so we didn't create this continuum. We borrowed this from Colorado State University, but we adapted it to where the Kansas State is at. And what the Continuum of Engaged Scholarship is really just a beginning way to help us locate where we are in engaged learning and our scholarly work and applied learning. And so this continuum here is really meant to help us place ourselves. Where do we fit in when we're talking about applied learning, engagement, and are we informing, are we consulting, are we co-creating? And so when you look at this continuum here, and if we look at the middle part of teaching, it's broken down to help us understand where we can see ourselves. Sometimes in our teaching, we are informing, we are working with external partners and we are providing guidance. Other times we involve them and it's a lot more of a two-way street. And as you can see in the continuum, you can see the little arrows. So you would place yourself as the big purple dot on here. And you see some of the arrows are going out, extending out, or they're a two-way. And so the continuum kind of helps us understand where we're at, but also where we want to go. And the continuum isn't meant to be just linear. We have to go from informed to involved to co-create. Sometimes, and Tamara will give us some examples, there's times when we're working with external partners where we're at that collaboration, and then, where we're continuing to work with the external partners, a new cohort comes in, we need to go back to consulting. And so it allows us to kind of move in a way that is beneficial, mutually beneficial with the partner that we're working with, but also where we're at in our work. It's also, when you're working in your research, are we co-creating with our partners? How do also students see themselves? How do they want to be involved in the ways that we are approaching with where we're working externally? And so with this continuum, I think the beauty of it is that there isn't a wrong place to start. And that's always the key message that we want to give when we show this continuum. There's some that start with informing and there's others that are already co-creating, but it's applicable to any department, whether it is, in the geology department, it is with applied sciences, arts. There's different ways that you can see yourselves here and start to really understand if we want to do engaged scholarly work, which most of us are already doing, it's just really hard to define. And so this is meant to help us figure out where we land in as we move forward for this next strategic plan and where we want to go. I think, when we're looking here too as well, if when you initially see this, we're curious to know, where do you see yourselves in this? Is it mostly consulting? Is it collaborating? Or are we in the inform and we're just kind of not sure where we need to go, where we need to be to co-create? And so in the chat, we would really like to invite you to go ahead and just kind of, as you're looking at this, where do you initially see yourself? And go ahead and list that in the chat. And Tim, go ahead and jump in as well, as when we're talking about involving consulting, how can, I'm so sorry, our phone is ringing. How can we continue to move forward in this continuum?
Yeah, as people are trying to locate themselves, or maybe it's aspirational, like, gosh, I really like to do this in my classroom, and this is where I'd like to be. So maybe it could be both ways. One thing I think is really important here is we want a bunch of this activity happening at Kansas State University, and we want it happening in our scholarly units. We want it happening in athletics. We want it happening when our alumni are creating partnerships. So you can think of just like all the ways. I'm talking like engagement almost in this broadest ecumenical sense of lots of people feeling responsible for connecting with external stakeholders, would-be partners, et cetera, and not getting judgy here about we need everybody in the co-production of knowledge at all phases, or the co-production of teaching. In some cases, it makes perfect sense to be co-producing with people impacted or with people involved in the content matter in your courses. In other cases, it's really appropriate to set up a consulting relationship, or to get on the radio and have your class send out a really good message that our community needs to know about the thing you all have been learning and struggling with. So I think this is an underscore. Like, I don't think Mirna or I or other people that are on our team feel like our job is to convert people from informed to co-creation, and we're going to track that. What we do want to track is lots of engaged activity. And obviously this lunch hour, this noon hour, we're spending time on teaching. And for many of us, it bleeds into our scholarship, our SCAD activities, or it bleeds into the kinds of things we raise our hand to serve on, whether those are national efforts or local efforts or boards, et cetera. So, while we broke these out, it's a little bit messier.
And two, I would mention, those examples that are listed there, those aren't the only examples. We just use that as a starting point to help paint the picture of giving the opportunity, some of the things that are already happening. And so even though, some of the scholarly work that you are already doing might not be listed here, it doesn't mean that it doesn't fit into the continuum. This is something that can evolve over time, but we just wanted to get the conversation started to help people start to see where they can fit into this world.
Great. I just wonder, maybe a couple of you, if you'd like to get off mute and just say just like what that looks like for you. I'm looking here, Deborah, you said consulting. Like, could you just give us a little sample of what that looks like, or why you think of that's the space you're currently in?
Well, in my position, I do consult with faculty members on how that they can increase student engagement by course design.
Yep.
So although I don't have a teaching role, I work very actively in making sure that the content is the best that it can be for our students.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. Anyone else, whether you put it in the chat or not, just kind of unmute. I'd like to hear just a couple of other examples. Maybe you think of your work being in another one of those columns other than consulting.
So I can share. I listed 3 areas: inform, consult, and collaborate. So examples of those in kind of the last semester or coming semester. I've done a couple different community workshops on artificial intelligence and machine learning, ChatGPT, for like Chamber of Commerce. I'm doing a similar one for a wine growers association down in Wichita later this month. For consulting, I've worked with a local company here in Manhattan for a couple years now as kind of a helping with operations and technology. She does ACT test prep classes throughout Kansas and Missouri, and kind of helping streamline some of her operations. From a collaboration point of view, I had a new course for me that I taught last semester on logistics and warehouse management, and brought in speakers from 14 different companies that are, companies that recruit from K-State and had partnerships with K-State, talking about how they handle logistics and warehouse management in their business, and get them an opportunity to interact with students.
That's great. Yeah, and real clean, like I could see Brandon in each one of those. Earlier, Mirna designated like what these little simple graphics. So I don't want to go too far into graphics because they just are what they are. They're just supposed to start ideas. They're not supposed to be true. But as Brandon was saying, on the first one, there he is kind of standing there delivering what to most people is really important information right now, particularly around artificial intelligence, and most of us are kind of swimming or not knowing. And here's Brandon saying, I have something to offer. And that's really helpful, particularly on that issue and others where lots of people need to know. And then other times, here he is, and people have a challenge or they have something, they're coming, and he's able to have this consultancy relationship. We have classes here at K-State that do that. And then that last one, as we could imagine, those 14 different folks starting to become kind of a network, and they're sharing and they're in his class, and all kinds of things might emerge from that collaboration. So that just kind of underscores what we were trying to just show just quickly, just to give people an idea of how the power dynamic. I might underscore, Colorado State started with the International Association of Public Participation. So this continuum also, in full disclosure, has democratic roots. And the continuum was originally created to show what shifts in power relations. And so, even as Brandon's talking and you're thinking about who has control or who controls the message or the teaching or the knowledge creation, that's implied in here, that there's something starts to shift. And so some of you may think of that through the lens of equity or through the lens of democratic practices. And I think that's all available to you also, if that's part of what motivates you or peers to get involved, that this actually came from a public participation graphic, trying to open up more access for people to be involved in public decision making. Just maybe one more, and then we might shift to applied learning. One more example of what this engaged teaching looks like for you.
And I might just touch on the co-create, because as I'm looking on the chat, a lot of like the informed consulting involved, but I think when we're talking too about co-creation, so one perfect example is we're going to use the extension system as an example. And right now there is it started as a partnership. We're going to highlight them on the next regional community visit, but the Garden for Good, that was a partnership that they had reached out and they were wanting to find curriculum for the correctional facility and inmates. And and sometimes this takes time. This isn't going to be, as we've mentioned, you're going to go from point A to B, C, D very quickly. Over the last 11 years that this program has been in place, they have co-created what this partnership looks like, because Extension, if we use that graphic, the purple dot, started co-creating this Garden for Good, where inmates can partner, create their own produce, grow it, but also, find the benefits and the skills. But then because that produce was now being sold to other community partners, you can see in that graphic where they start to branch out, different partnerships start to evolve. And so the partnership with the correctional facility has now extended to the food banks. It has extended to their emergency shelters. So partnerships, co-creating looks differently for everyone. But I just wanted to provide that example because there are different ways that we can look at it. But I think when we're talking about being fully engaged and being mutually beneficial on relationships, it's also expanding and including other outside partners, building that bridge larger and better together to find ways to make progress in some of the challenges that community students are seeing in the real world, and having that, being able to be a part of that solution.
That's an awesome example. Any comments or questions about this? We don't want to get off this too fast, but I also want to spend a little bit of time talking about some service learning and what that might look like for anybody on this call or your peers. Any comments or question about, this continuum or a thought you had in relation to this? I should note too, this is in addition to that language in the handbook being passed, that faculty senate group proposed and also were the editors of this continuum. So that kind of went through at the same time, that we would use this as a way to help catalyze and start conversations across campus about what scholarly engagement looks like. But any comments or questions before we turn to the next page?
I do have a question, and the question I have is that what kind of resistance do you have from faculty who don't want to be on this continuum at all? I know you said you're not coming to convert and those kinds of things, but there are some people who have a very traditional view of the academy. And very much are siloed on the ivory tower and those kind of things, and are not looking at community engagement as something that they're looking to get into. So I'm just kind of wondering, like, what kinds of resistances have you come across? How do you address those resistances? How do we kind of build partners? And then how do you, and this may be part of your talk coming up, is how do you start? Because I know there's a lot of people that want to do this, but they just don't know how, and they don't have models in their discipline.
Yeah, I'll start with one. At least now in 2024, I don't think we need everybody raising their hand and that they think this is part of their identity. So I think we need more than we currently have. I think we need examples in every department or every unit, and we have examples at the college level for sure. So I don't think everybody needs to feel like this is this is the way that I show up and do it. I think where it fits well is somebody who's doing baseline research, or somebody who is working in a technical field where we need, well, maybe I should call it like bench kind of research. And one way that we've leveraged those folks without this being their identity is, I think that works well on expert panels. I think that works well when we're going after dollars, to fund, and there might be an engagement component in the larger intervention, but you need that kind of research. So I'm okay with a lot of people actually saying, I know about this, I think it's important, but it's not my flavor, it's not for me. But I think, to your point, Don, I don't know what the percentage is, but let's say 25% more folks would think of this as not just something I do for dessert or something I do after I've got a good reputation or tenure or something, but something I could do on day one. And more importantly, I would actually raise my hand and come to a land grant university because I know they do this kind of work. So I know we do a bunch of learn by doing. I know we do all kinds of work in communities. I know that we make a difference on these wicked problems out there. So I want to be a faculty member at K-State. That would show to me that we had been successful, that there was a critical mass of people who came here or stayed here or felt like these are my people. That feels like something we'd be shooting for. I'm not so sure about how we start, except I think using Tamara's examples here coming up of service learning might be a great way of the how-to piece there of how would you start doing that might be one way to get into that conversation.
Thank you. I appreciate those thoughts.
Yep.
Yeah, let's kind of jump a layer down. I think that what this conversation has me thinking about is that we have had faculty and part of the K-State experience to be really focused on engagement, especially through, as we think about our extension offices that have historically been part of a land grant institution. This is just really teasing out the importance of this and having us think about how would we, in our respective roles and our respective departments and units, all fall with this idea of each student having an engaged learning experience before they graduate. So that doesn't mean every class, every semester, every experience, but how do we intentionally build engaged learning experiences throughout? And I know on this call here, we've got some members from our engaged learning team that are thinking about and helping to craft out what it looks like to have an education abroad experience, an undergraduate research experience, an internship. Carrie Keller is here, and Maggie Billman and Trish Scott are here, and they're great resources as they think about the university building a plan where we can measure and track each of the students having these experiences. What we want to open up for the second half of this conversation is really a focus on service learning and thinking about what are the ways in, what is service learning, what are the ways in, what are the kinds of learning and support information that we need today to really help think about advancing this as we move forward. So, you know, across the country and at different universities, there's a lot of dialogue about the definition of service learning, what it is, and I think you could really get into the nuances of that. I'd rather just jump into the practices and think about how we can think about service learning in our courses that we're teaching and in the programs that we have. And so here's a definition that we're holding up related to what service learning is, that it is about integration of academic material, relevant service activities, and critical reflection in a reciprocal partnership that engages students, faculty and staff, and community members to achieve academic, civic, and personal learning objectives, as well as to advance public purposes. And so I want to share just a little story about how I got into service learning, and then again, open it up to a conversation to say, how might we start, or what is the work that's already happening? We know that there have been faculty engaged in service learning all across the campus for a long time. I'm seeing colleagues on here from our English department, modern languages, architecture, planning, and design. Just yesterday, I was meeting with someone in the dietetics program through Health and Human Sciences, all doing this work. What we want to do is think about what are the different places it could be naturally maybe integrated or more intentionally integrated as an engaged practice, as an applied learning experience that students can have. So Tim, next slide. The way I would describe my entry point into service learning is not that I had any noble value of like, oh, now I want to do service learning and teaching, but instead I would say service learning really found me in the classes that I was teaching. As many of us go, we often inherit a course that already has some curriculum and practices and design. I was first started teaching Lead 212 in 2010. And when that's our introduction to leadership concepts class. And even when I was a student at K-State, there was a one-day service experience with the Flint Hills Bread Basket, which is our local food pantry. And part of that, I don't even know the origins of that story, but I remember as a freshman at K-State, we went around Halloween and did trick-or-treating for, canned food products for the Flint Hills Bread Basket. Well, fast forward that to now I'm teaching this class, and we have this one-day service experience. It's just part of the course. And at the same time, I'm learning and hearing about all these engaged teaching practices. I don't know how many of you on here took the Principles of College Teaching class. Now that Dawn's teaching, you were not teaching it then, but just trying to frame ages there. So, but as I was thinking, I'm like, my gosh, everything we're trying to do really could be centered around this service experience if it were teed out more. So imagine a 10-year process then of better partnering with our partner at the Flint Hills Bread Basket to say, how do we understand what engagement looks like? And going back to the slide that Mirna shared around, or are we consulting? Are we informing? Are we co-collaborating? I would say every year it shifted given the context of what was happening in the society and the world around us, the availability of both the partner and of the faculty and the university resources to provide. But essentially a one-day service project turned into an 8-week-long service learning experience where we used the issue of food security as a vehicle to learn about and then practice leadership. And it took a lot of active experimentation. I would say for years, first it was like, oh, is this worth it? Like it felt really risky. And then like the learning at the end didn't feel like what I was hoping it would be. But that continuation of working with the partner, of thinking about how do we create a process. So you can see on here, we ended up shifting to an appreciative service learning model. So using appreciative inquiry as the frame in which to invite students to learn about the issue of food security, to discover what is already happening within the community, to learn more about our partner, to think about and dream about what a world without food insecurity would look like before they ever jump into what is the action or what is the direct service component. If for those of you in the room who are from Manhattan, you might remember, again, college students knocking on your door for cats for cans, right? Raising food and, going out and collecting canned food. Well, one of the first challenges we learned is that canned food is actually not what food pantries need now, right? Like that is not the the goal of what a conversation would look like. But in Lead 212, we have anywhere between 400 and 600 and some even 800 students that take the class. And so with a lot of people power, you can do a lot of great things. And so then it became about spreading awareness about food security, spreading awareness about the services and resources for the Flint Hills Breadbasket, and if they have a donation or something that they can make, and really allowing students the opportunity to see how they can put their practices of leadership together around an issue like food insecurity and food security. And then thinking about in their life, what does that look like? Where does that go? And so I like to share the story because, again, I feel like it found me. It wasn't that I found it. And through the collaboration and through the conversations that we've had with so many different partners, we've worked with the city of Manhattan to help develop an online interactive GPS space where we could map out neighborhoods so we weren't having students go to the same neighborhoods. We had more conversations once Cat's Cupboard got developed. What's the relationship between Flint Hills Breadbasket and Cat's Cupboard? And I think that, you know, thinking how do we support both without, you know, abandoning one or moving to the other, and how do we partner and collaborate in that space? So every year COVID brought a whole different approach to what service learning would look like and what our capacity was. But I think that the premise becomes, is there that opportunity for an applied experience for something in our community that's either a need or a partner that we could get engaging with in terms of the classes that we have? So that's what we want to do now, is have you all hop into some breakout rooms. These are going to be randomized, and what we want you to do is just talk about, one, do you already have a service learning experience that you're doing? And if so, how did it begin? Did it begin with an issue? Did it begin with a partner? Did it begin with a need, right? How did you see that? And what does it look like? Or if you're new to the conversation and thinking about what it would look like to do a service learning experience, what could that be? Given the course you're teaching, given the work that you're doing, what might happen? And the other example I'll give to get it out of the leadership context is with our partners that I was visiting with in dietetics yesterday. They were talking about that doing a dietetics internship and service learning experience in Guatemala, right? To learn and engage with different communities and different resources and different backgrounds. That's the heart of where that was. And they've been able to design a international abroad experience also engaging in that service. So it can happen in a lot of different ways. All right, any questions before we put you into some breakout rooms? All right, we'll give you about 5 minutes and then we'll open it up for conversation, for reactions, thoughts about how we might think about the starting place and where this goes.
Okay. Rooms are open.
Sorry, Don, I think you're muted.
I was saying we're the only ones back. That almost seems impossible.
Everyone else just is waiting to get kicked out of their breakout room.
But wouldn't like Tim and Tamara be here? Like,
Yeah,
hmm. All right. Well,
we're in the twilight
all right,
zone.
there we go. I'm feeling a little better now. Hey, y'all.
All right, welcome back, everyone. I have no doubt that we probably had 7 unique conversations, depending on who was in the room and experiences and interests in what was happening. But my takeaway from our group is that one of the best parts of this kind of conversation and you all showing up is that it creates the space for us to think about this work together, no matter where we are in the journey, in the starting process, and how we can learn about this. I think as we've talked about, service learning is a engaged pedagogy, and it can be really challenging. It's a lot easier and safer, right, to think about just getting up and lecturing, right? But the value and the transformation that we know can come from service learning is really valuable, and hopefully the positive impact within the community. So I would just like to open it up to you all. What stood out from your conversations? What's going through your mind? Questions that you have?
I'll start, of course. How you do? And just say the last thing we talked about is that too often faculty who spend a lot of time thinking about their prep for their course and how they're going to evaluate student work, when they get home, they're not necessarily thinking about, oh, I can make this connection in the community for my students or for me to do service work. It's difficult to get that somewhere in the brain and be looking for opportunity, because we're also burdened during the day with meetings and prep for our own classes, really look for those opportunities. So we were talking about that as sometimes a hindrance to missing opportunities.
Yeah. Anyone else resonate with that or have anything they want to add on to what LaBarbara shared?
I think that's such a great point. And so in my current position, I supervise 7 students and they work 18 to 20 hours a week on average, which is a lot. And so I'm thinking in terms of when we offer applied learning opportunities, if possible, giving students the chance to connect with their learning to something they're already doing. Is there a way they can connect it with their job, with their organization, if they're an athlete, if they're involved in debate or band, if there are ways that we can still have them do the work and apply that learning in a different context in the classroom, but not necessarily add thing 101 to their list of 100 things to do, that it's while you're already doing this other thing, we want you to think about other stuff, because that really resonates with me, what you said, LaBarbara. So depending on what that service learning is, if we keep in mind what else are students already doing, that we can just enhance that existing piece if possible. Though there's also value to things that exposure to new ideas, but depending on what kind of class we're teaching and what our students' needs are, that might be something to consider.
I think that's wonderful. Did anyone have any aha moments about, I see it as you were talking, I was visualizing a dial. It's like, we've started here, like, how do we just go up 1 notch, right? Like, just test it, see if it works, see if that engagement or that service or the reflection on the service is a little bit more intentional. Did anyone think about that in your conversation or have an example?
Well, I'll go back and say that even though Andy had to leave us, she was saying, she does some of these things, but the question is, how do you evaluate it? During the time that they're doing this work outside of the classroom, how do you bring it back? Because you're not there necessarily with them, but what's the metric or what's the criteria that you're going to use to say whether that was a good experience or not a good experience? Because there's always good lessons one can learn from bad experiences. So I just wanted to share that because she had to leave.
Our group talked about that a little bit in terms of, there's a lot of elements of service learning and what are the greatest struggles or challenges or barriers that we face. And, my hope is that as the university continues to hold this up as an important practice and engaged practice, we're going to have more support and resources and, become a community of practice where we can explore some of these challenges. And maybe, LaBarbara, maybe you've been the one who figured out the critical reflection piece and like, well, what does it look like to help get students there? And what is that, space in? And maybe Brandon will be the one who will share, like, oh, here's how we get students excited and engaged and think about doing things with the community, not for or to them. And we create that kind of community where we can engage. One of the things that we talked about in our group was how, what part of service learning, how do you get that critical reflection? And that was where I struggled with the most, is that, at first I was assigning points for the service experience. And then we were working with Dr. Patty Clayton, who does a lot of work with service learning. And she was like, oh, you never get points for the service. You do it for the reflection on the service. But I'm like, but how do you reflect well enough on the service? And what's that look like? And I'm hoping that throughout the years to come, we're going to find that we can share resources, we can collaborate and uphold. So this doesn't feel as daunting of a practice, but it feels like something that's a little bit more tangible in what we're going to do. I just dropped in the chat one of my favorite articles that again provided me a framework to think about how I invite students into that critical reflection. And again, I hope that that's the conversation we have. On the forefront, I would also say that the university, again, is a commitment to service learning and this applied learning experience, is hiring for a new faculty member who 50% of their appointment is administration around service learning to help hold up, bring together people, resources, and ideas around service learning, as well as teach. And as we know, this isn't going to be like, light switch. This isn't going to be a quick fix that it's going to make it easy, but someone who can, again, bring great minds together like this and think about what we need to be able to do this work in more intentional ways. Other thoughts or connections that you made in your small group conversation? Great timing, Tim. I'll let you kind of close us out and we'll think about next steps.
Yeah, so I just put contact information here. Mirna, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to send us away with or underline.
No, I think that we, as we continue in this space, in this work, just keep in mind patience, and it's ever evolving. It looks differently for everyone, and our hope as we move forward with the strategic plan, please know that the Staley School, the Office of Engagement, like we are here to help think through that as well. We're not here to say this is what needs to be done and it'll be A, B, C, and D. It's more so of what does it look like for you and how can we be a resource to you to help think through a pathway that works for you, for your students, and in the scholarly work that's already been happening.
Don, do you have any closing words for the group?
I'll close out the entire event, but do you have any concluding statements before I close out the entire event?
Nope, I'm good.
All right. So thank you all for being part of the presentation today. So thank you to Mirna Bonilla, Tim Steffensmeier, Tamara Bauer, and Trish Gott for talking to us about engagement and service learning at K-State. We will have a post-event survey for you to complete. We'll put that into the chat right now. I'll also remind you that our professional development series meets every Wednesday at noon, and we archive the events. This will be on our website later today. So point your colleagues to this, because I think not only is this important to the strategic goal of the university, it's actually what the university is about, right? We are connected to our environment. We're connected to our community. We are a positive force for that community, and working with them is something that we do. So I really appreciate the leadership that you have all shown in this arena, and I hope that we're going to do wonderful things